feelings aren't valid.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that in a sec. And it is okay to be okay.
Yeah. Well, I would say when people say my feelings are valid, they're not talking about their feelings. They're talking about their emotions.
Yeah, or their judgment.
Or their judgment.
Yeah, or their story.
And
Yes.
and that's it.
Thank you for joining us. I'm all by myself for our second podcast. Oh, and you made it!
Yeah,
Oh my
I
gosh,
did. It was a long walk all the way from the other side of the camera.
I've known you. We'll go way back to the back of the room.
Back from the other side of the room. Yeah.
Okay, so this is part two, kind of. Our first post would have been about. I think we were gonna call it toxic positivity, but I think that's what this is. The first one is more about the hustle culture.
Hustle culture, yeah.
And then we moved into this tonight, so because we had a part two, we don't want to make these too long. So let's get right into it. So today is about toxic positivity. Thanks for joining both myself, Morgan Pierce. If you've never been here before, thanks for joining us.
Andrew Podvang.
We are life coaches with the mission to help people recognize the truth of who they are and get out of the illusion of their thinking and into a feeling. But today, we're going to use that understanding to talk a little bit about the things we read or what we hear clients say sometimes as objections to experiencing something other than happiness.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
hilarious.
really.
People will... there's an old meme I always love. It says the problem with hamburger helpers, the hamburger has to want to be healthy.
Yeah.
It's like, so are you willing to put down what makes you sick? And here's some of the things. We're just going to share some of the things maybe that we hear that maybe will pop up time to time, and then just address them. So
and these are the kind of things that when you hear them, they make you feel good in the moment, but it's not sustainable. It's not a way to live your life. And some people try to live their lives by it, and it just doesn't prove to be sustainable. And so that's why we're going to bring them up today and just unpack them.
Yeah,
unpack them from our understanding.
Yeah. And so where do you want to start? Is there one that pops to your mind? There was one you said when we were coming in. I thought
everything happens for a reason.
That's such a big one.
Yeah, that's such a big one. Yeah, I love how Andrew always follows that up. Yeah, and it's the reason that you assign to it after it happens.
Yeah, the hindsight's 20/20. It's so true. Yeah. And it's really tough. I mean, it kind of talks about it folds in on itself because it's really in the language. It's like everything happens for a reason. Yes. But only when we look back and know it. If that was true, if everything happened for a reason, we would know what to do because we would know the reason. This is happening. I just do this, and then that will tell me what to do.
And I think that's what gets in people's way, right? Is they have that belief everything happens for a reason, so they think they can calculate it to figure out for the next step. Okay, how can I prevent this from happening again if it's happening for a reason?
Yeah, and there's a couple of reasons why that even though it feels good because we want to be like, things are happening to me, and I don't want to be angry, and don't get us wrong. We know that everything in your life does have a purpose. It's an opportunity to choose who you are. If something occurs for you, you make a choice, and that choice does become the past. But that choice was made in the moment. And the reason why we kind of push that away is not because we don't believe that our past gives us an opportunity, but a couple things where it folds in. One is if you're looking at the past to teach you who you want to be, you're looking over your shoulder. And there's not a lot looking forward. And creativity in our life is moving forward. And the past will not usually reoccur the exact same way. So if you take an old framework, I've seen relationships get destroyed because a man is really guarding his phone, and a woman who's complaining said, last time I was in a relationship, the man guarded his phone, he was cheating on me, and she broke into his phone and realized that he was hiding her surprise birthday party. And so it's like that past framework can really get in the way. And there is stuff. There are moments to take a second to appreciate your past and to see your growth. But most creativity is about now moving forward.
And the one thing that really helped me understand that was when you're looking at the past, you're not looking at it as in what actually happened. You're looking at it from where you are right now, and that's a skewed version of what's actually happening. So your memory of the past and what's actually happened isn't accurate.
Yes.
Like we say, how many times you've been in the same situation with somebody and they recollect it one way and you recollect it a completely different way.
Yeah. Retrograde amnesia, I think they call it. It's like I've had stories where I thought they were like, this is how it is. And then I meet the person the story's about and they're like, that wasn't it. I wasn't even there. I'm like, oh. Like, I just made that up. How old am I? But that's really how the mind works. And that's why we don't really want... People can't change if they're looking in the past. Change happens in the moment. and it doesn't happen by over analyzing why did this happen to me, and there's never a good answer really.
Yeah.
The answer is because it happened, and we can take something from it moving forward.
Yeah.
And so it's not that it happened for a reason. It's going to be about a choice, and that's where change occurs, which actually takes me to, is there anything else we want to say about
Well, I
that?
was just going to say, instead of everything happens for a reason, I love that we've changed it to everything is happening as it should,
Yeah.
which gives you the power to make a choice in the moment on how you want to show up to it.
Yeah, because that's a reality statement of like, hey, it's happened. We can't argue with that. What if we accept it, and then what do we do from here?
Yeah.
What,
Yeah,
what- We
exactly.
can use that tool, and that's the difference between, therapy wants to unpack everything and try to figure it out. We want to heal from it, but we want to move forward into creation of what you want your life to be. It's like you're too busy focused on the problem, and you're not focused on the solution, and that's where people get stuck.
Yeah.
And so that's why that's saying, if you say whatever, if you've said before, everything happens for a reason, I would let that go and just say, I accept life as it is, and what's happening is you're the reason.
Yeah.
You the choice
You
you
are
made.
the reason. Yeah.
Pardon me, which is why people can change. Because if everything happened for a reason, then we would just bump around like robots being programmed, and it wouldn't allow us to change. And
Yeah,
witness
there'd never
people.
be there'd never be that opportunity to shift and change and create what you really want.
So screw that saying. Which is actually leads to the next thing that people say, which is that change takes time. People
Yeah.
say that. People
Yeah,
say,
it takes time to heal.
takes time.
Those kind of
to
things.
heal.
Yeah.
Great song, not so good of a philosophy. It feels, I would say it takes time, only the amount of time. There's that great line that said, people's growth will occur with the speed that they can handle the truth of who they are without resistance, or something along those lines.
Right.
And I think that's where it takes time, because anytime I've seen change in someone, it's in
an instant.
in the
It's
moment.
in the moment.
And then and so
And the time is just learning to apply that to your life more and more. That's the time I would say that people think is the time it takes time to heal. Well, you've healed from that. Now it's just integrating it into your life.
yeah. So like I look at it as that's bang on, because what we're looking at is how many times we've asked before, how many times would I have to drive you to work in a faster, more efficient, better route
Yeah.
for you to decide to take that path?
Yeah.
And then people jump ahead. They say, well, you'd have to drive me a bunch of times. No, stop for a sec. How many times do I have to drive you a better way, more fuel efficient, all that stuff for you to decide to take it? And they go, well, right away. There it is.
Yeah.
That's the decision.
You may have
where
to call
change
me partway
occurs.
through because you forget which
Yeah.
turn to take or
Yes.
whatever, but you're gonna choose in that moment. This is a better way. I want to start taking it.
And that's the impatience. People think as soon as they decide to change that it's supposed to happen. And that's a 90-degree. That's why people fail at trying to change. They think it's not working, but we compare it to, instead of you're taking a left-hand turn in a boat, which is impossible without flipping it, that it drifts. And the awareness without judgment and shame will cause that shift to occur.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, the healing happens in a moment, in an instant,
Yeah.
and then it's just integrating into your life. It's the change that takes a bit of time because you're integrating into a life that you've lived a certain way for so long, up until that moment, and then it's just bringing awareness to it and taking action on what you really want.
right. Like I'll ask people how many times when they've heard words like when I was a kid, they had these like black licorice babies, or I've heard, and they were called like a racial slur that starts with N and ends with R. I don't want to say it. Okay, I'll say it. Neighbor. And so they would call them that and then we found out that was really wrong. We were kids. It was in the 80s. I'm an old man. And instantly that changed. And I asked people, even the R word, like when you heard that was inappropriate, how long did it take you to shift that? And they were like, relatively right away. I'm like, right.
Yep.
Like it wasn't like, well, but I've been like that for a long time, Morgan. If that's the way.
Yeah,
There's no justification. The same way they are to
Yeah.
change, to let go of their pain. And it's scary to let go of your pain because it starts to lean on identity.
Yeah. Yep.
And who am
It's
I?
a belief of who you are, and that's exactly it. When you see something's hurting somebody else, you can so quickly and easily change it. But when you see that it's hurting you, there's the story about it being a part of who you are that is what makes it hard to let go of. And the second you realize it's not who you are, it's just what you've been doing, then it's easy to let go of it and start to make a different decision for yourself.
Well said. That's perfect. Let's move on to the next thing then. I think that's a nice chunk of...
Which would move into, I would say probably the next one off of that would be, I have to process this.
Oh, yeah. I need to take time to think about it. I need to process this. And I say process, potato. Yeah, you're
Is
so...
it data or data?
Yeah, exactly. It depends if we're talking about the guy from Star Trek or actual information. Yeah, I totally... That's one we hear all the time. I have to take time to think about it. Or I need to take... Yeah. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think you said it perfectly. It's like I need to take time to argue with myself for why it's not true.
Yeah. Why won't this work?
Yeah.
What are the risks
Yeah.
of this making this decision?
Yeah,
It's not actually.
let me figure out why it won't work.
Yeah. People, I see people talk themselves out of this kind of thing all the time. Like a classic example is they think about leaving a job or they want to open a business. They open the business once perfect. It's like, well, what do you want to do? Well, I want to open up a retail store. You're like, okay, well, what's getting in the way? It's like, well, it's just that I'm not sure if Kingston will or this area will accept it, and then I'm not really good at bookkeeping. I have to hire someone. That's an expense, and if I'm not successful, that'll put pressure on.
It's a lot of overhead.
And then if I am successful, I have a bunch of. And then I have to hire staff. I'm not good at managing people, and then pretty soon they're like, I don't want to run a Walmart. So they went from a corner shop to like,
exactly.
I don't want to be that busy. I can't even spend any time with my family. I'm like, wow, you really took that to like. Destructive.
Yeah, which is future projection, right?
Catastrophic thinking is people's favorite thing, and it's very common. And so, yeah, I think I love that. I need to think about it. So, how do you deal with that for you? Because I know how I deal with that.
How do I deal with it? I mean, really, I guess it's just like, well, what's there to think about? And then we can unpack it right in that moment.
Yeah, to help them kind of flush it out.
Yeah, it's like, well, what do you really need to think about? And then we can bring those thoughts right out to the table and see what they really are, instead of like, sure, yeah, go home and think about it, and then call me later and tell me about how it won't work.
I think often that's very true, and I think they often know already. It's just, again, they're so worried about making the wrong choice, and it goes back to people's biggest fear. We talked about it, I think, a little bit in the last podcast. I'm not afraid to fail. I'm afraid to look like a failure.
Yeah.
If I make a mistake, I feel naive. I feel stupid. I'm worried about protecting my identity. I don't want to look stupid, or I'm not sure I know what to do. If they didn't feel that way, they would lean into what they really want without any fear and create. Yeah. But because they're like, well, this might be a bad choice, and what if, and logic is one of your biggest resistances outside of we talk about how sometimes friends and family can be that because they put you in a box, and they think, well, that's who you are. And we always warn people, if you haven't seen me in a year, you probably don't know who I am. Or and same with you, it's like our growth game is strong. The people around us grow like that. Putting people in boxes so they feel safe about who we are, who they think that we other, and that's with people like you, like your friends, your family. When I first started magic, and I was like, I think I'm going to go to university and use magic, and my mom was like, how much are you going to charge? And I told her, and she's like, no one's going to pay that. But I was in a spot where I was like, oh, my mom couldn't see herself charging that rather than and so it didn't stop me from doing it. And I know my mom loves me too. Of course, that's the crazy part. She's a great supporter of all that magic. Anything.
What's the crabs in the bucket theory, right? It's like they're not peeling you down. They're not trying to cut you down because they don't want you to succeed. It's the fear of losing you in their lives. If you do become what you want to be, well, then what does that mean about them? Where would that leave them?
Yeah. Yes, and it also for some people is the fear of watching you suffer at something you want, and now they feel like they want to rescue that like, oh no, someone I love isn't doing well, and now I'm worried about them, and so that's a big one too. So, but yeah, that whole I have to think about it. There's an exercise that I think it was Michael Neal brought to the table about the coin flip. Yeah, and I thought that was really cool, where it's like, to have have a real coin and then commit to one decision, other, and flip it, and then before you look at it, be like, just checking like what, and so you don't have to flip a coin. Just what thing do you really just a little bit more want that you're afraid of,
or even reveal what it is. Sometimes I'll do is reveal what it is, and how did you feel about that?
Good.
Were you excited about it, or were you like, oh crap? That's
there's that little part.
There's always that little part of you that knows what you really want.
There's no right decisions. People want to ask us like, what do I do? And it's like, should I do A or B? And I'm like, yes. Like, that's not an answer. It's like, I mean, there is no right answer.
I can't tell you what to do.
The best answer is the right answer, which you'll only discover through doing. The second best answer is the wrong answer, which you can often shift to a different answer, which is why we're not
Which we talked about in the last podcast, right? About making the decision. If you fail at it, or if you lose out on the dream or the goal or the aspiration that you've been working towards, well, then you just shift and you change it, and you work. You're not starting from scratch. You're starting from the experience that you've
because nothing leads to nothing. You can't get experience from that. But let's go back a step, because that's in decision making. That processing thing sometimes is we've uncovered something, a truth that someone's had, and that they've had a moment of where they feel the moment of like, wow, there's clarity there. Yeah. And then identity and the fear it wants to bury, because letting go of that. I mean, as you said before, secondary gain stuff where people want to hold on to their trauma or their pain. Because it can't be this simple. It can't be this easy. I've been holding on to it for years. It can't be, and it actually is
simple.
It's it's not easy. It's not.
I always say it's not easy, but it's simple.
That's yes,
Yeah.
there it is. And so
Yeah.
it's not. Yeah, you mulled it over, and people say, well, this is a big problem. Well, the problem is that you've spent a lot of time thinking about the problem.
Yeah.
That's the energetic. There's no size and problems as we know. But what let's go to that place where when they are wanting to process.
Yeah.
Do we have any insight for people that are like, well, yeah, I had an epiphany about something, and I want to digest it. What's the difference between how they should maybe do it and not the way of let me try to figure out how I can double down on my opinion.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people, because we've been trained that way, is like I need to think about it. I need to weigh the pros and cons. I need to do this. I need to engulf it in thinking. Right. And the way that we deal with it,
identity.
Exactly. And the way we deal with it now is I know I want to make a decision on something. Let's become present still in our day-to-day life and the things we need to do and see what occurs for us.
Yeah, and what's the risk? What's the risk of letting go versus what's the risk of holding on?
Right.
That's a good one.
That's a good one.
Yeah, and I also think because we always say the most noble thing your brain can do is be an interpreter for the truth of who you are. This place of innate intelligence we talk about, the concept of awareness, consciousness, all the things we've labeled it as with a lack of language to describe it. What if you just brought into? I just want people to be in that, and rather than just prove it, be like, what would that feeling allow you to do? In other words, like take a second to be like, okay, yeah, I felt that a long way, because doubling down on what you're already doing, it's almost like that insanity thing. It's like what I said last one. There's a big difference between I'm trying something and it might not work, which is life, and I'm trying something that isn't working, but I don't want to let go of that.
Yeah.
And I encourage people, like I asked them the major question, and it's hard to answer, but it isn't. How would you know? Because most people, if you're here, you're probably like we were, on a search to feel better, on a search to experience. How would you know if you found it? That's the weird part. We're looking.
We won't even know what it is.
And I see a lot of people that are like, I got it. That can't be it. I got it. And because so much has led them, they've tried therapy, they've tried counseling, they've tried self-help, and then none of it's stuck.
Well, and I think that's something that we do really well is defining what it is that you're really looking for.
Yeah, and how, not just what, but like how will you know? What's the feeling you're finding? Like eureka.
Yeah, because that's exactly it. It's not a thing. It's not an outside object. It's a feeling. It's a feeling that most people, when they try to describe it, they try to come up with words, but it's hard to define what it really is, which is the truth of who you are and how we try to explain that.
It is a feeling. It's not an emotion.
No.
And even if someone says, I felt emotion in this situation where we are bringing them to it, I'll say, what did it feel like? And they'll be like, unbelievable. Or they'll go say, I'm like, that's not an emotion. Yeah. But they're trying to describe the same thing. And so I think that's the answer that we're giving you is, instead of processing it of like, why won't they, thinking about it and doubling down on what your brain does naturally, which is judge. Take a second to ask yourself, am I feeling the way I want? And if this is true, this is the way I feel. What would it do for me if I could stay here longer or participate in this feeling more?
Yeah.
What would that do? I think that would.
Yeah. And I feel like that creates the most shifts is people that aren't aware of that being even a possibility because they've spent so much time in their thinking disproving. You know,
why won't this work? Because here's another thing that won't work, and I don't blame them. Everything, I was in that spot myself.
Of course,
you try so many things, you're like, none of this works. You just start to expect like, if every time you bought something it broke in a month, you're like, it'd be a miracle if it lasted. Like,
and that's it. Yeah,
why
I try and remind people of that too, right? Like you're not crazy because you think this way. You're human.
The world's crazy.
You're human. Yeah.
It's a crazy thing. It's a messy thing. I had this wisdom pop up that we say like a truth makes you feel light and a lie makes you feel heavy. So to really check in on not your emotions, but the feeling that's present of what I'm hearing, is it making me feel lighter? Well, what is that?
Yeah.
And how and that, I think that's a testimony to what it could be for you. It's like, is that lightness the way you want to feel? Yeah. Well, what is that telling you?
Yeah.
Can I artificially create that? No.
Yeah.
So there's a part of you showing up in that, and that will give you, I think that's the search for truth is what we're looking for.
Yeah, I would say that every time I get frustrated with where I'm at, and I think whatever, I'm just going to give up and I'm not going to coach, that feeling, that heavy feeling sinks in, and it's like, I know that, and as soon as I decide, okay, I know I can get through whatever this is right now and can carry on with what I've said I want to do. And
you
then
just
the
let
lightness,
go.
I let go of it, and then the lightness occurs, and I realize that, what else am I going to do, because this is what I love.
Yeah, and you're unemployable, so.
I wouldn't hire me.
You too, man. Black sheep are hard to hire, man. We don't fit the employee role. I hope that resonates with everyone out there that just sees that.
Yeah. Yeah. What else did we have? What else?
My feelings are valid is another one that we put
My
up on the board.
feelings
But
are
there's a
valid.
board behind this. We're just trying to brainstorm. Toxic people. I think that my feelings are valid, and that goes with it's okay. We also said it's okay to not be okay. Those are two we can.
Those are
deal
good
with.
ones.
Those are together almost.
Yeah.
It's like feelings are valid, and it is okay to be not okay. But it's also your feelings aren't valid.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that in a sec. And it is okay to be okay.
Yeah. Well, I would say when people say my feelings are valid, they're not talking about their feelings. They're talking about their emotions.
Yeah, or their judgment.
Or their judgment.
Yeah,
on
or their
things, right?
story.
And
Yes.
and that's just a story that you've created that's creating the emotion within you. And it can be validated over and over because, we all have that level of thinking to be able to say, oh, yeah, I've thought that way before. And so that must be true.
Yeah, let's slow it down for people who are not been coached.
Yep.
When you have a thought, it creates an emotion. So if you're afraid of spiders and I run my hand across it, you would react to that even though there's not a spider. You'd have emotions, measurable. Maybe it's a fear response or anxiety or Anyways, my point is our minds are powerful things. When we watch movies, even though they're not real, we have emotions. And so it'd be weird to be like crying in a movie and someone's like, oh, I don't find it sad. And you're like, my emotions are valid on this movie. You wouldn't argue that. And so, and we do think, we're not saying emotions are bad. Experience your emotions. They're important.
Yeah.
But to make them.
It's understanding what they are, really.
Yeah, and to say that they're more important, like the emotions trump logic these days for people, right? I
so
felt a
much.
certain way, so I did it rather than like, well, if you felt a certain way emotionally, then you had a story that allowed you to believe that.
Yeah,
and
something created that emotion. There's a stimulus. Like we say, there's a stimulus.
Yeah.
A thought occurs, and that creates the emotion. And sometimes that happens so quick that we have to go back to really understand what it was that created that emotion. But some people don't realize, and they say, well, I just felt that way. Well, yeah, you did. But if you didn't realize how quickly your brain reacts to things, you would realize there was a judgment, there was a thought that occurred before.
Yeah, there is a belief in a story that created it.
Yeah.
And so when and I don't want to go back and, a lot of people want to go back and psychoanalyze.
Psychoanalyze all that.
I mean, it's fine. I'd just rather them recognize that, like, an emotion. It's okay to be afraid of spiders. It's okay to cry in a movie. It's okay to have a bad day. It's okay to be pissed off for a while at somebody's mistake or trespass, but it's not okay to hold on to it. It's not okay to make it.
Which would be that belief of it's okay to not be okay.
That's
it's like
exactly
you just
how I hear it.
Because it's that just validates
you can hold
sitting
on to
in
it.
Yeah, you can hang on to your pain. Well, how much is your pain costing you right now to hang on to it?
Yeah.
And if you just let go of it and realize that it is okay to not be okay, but how long do you want to stay there for?
Yeah. That's why I'd much rather be like, it's okay not to be okay. For a little.
Yeah. For a little.
And then let's move through it.
Yep.
And then instead of trying to understand why your emotions it's okay. It's just go back into the concept of love and compassion and forgiveness and gratitude or whatever it is that was required to be the opposite of what you're experiencing. When someone's like, oh, I feel lonely, I'm like, great. I mean, not great, but great. Thanks for, that's good. What does that feel like? Well, it feels empty. It feels this. What would be the antidote to that? Well, I guess I'm looking for connection. Well, what if you could feel connection, become connection?
Yeah.
So I had a guy we were working with. It was Valentine's Day, and you remember this, he didn't have a girlfriend.
Yeah.
And they just broke up, and he felt like for Valentine's Day it was really weighing on him. And so we're like, what are you really missing? He's like, I'm missing that connection of sharing love.
Yeah.
I was like, well, what if you were to go and cut out some hearts and write positive things and went to a store, like a retail like Walmart, and just outside, and just for a bit, hand it out to people that look like they needed.
Yeah, create the connection.
And then what? And he's like, he went and did it. And I was like, what was it like? He was like,
yeah,
it just filled him and other people. And he had it as like, did it fill? Yeah, because you are the solution. Everything that happens on the outside is just a reflection of what's going on within you.
Yeah.
And so if you are feeling something, great, you're human. And I want to move into this. It's like we're in a place where I always compare it to Spider-Man. It's like people have a negative feeling and they feel shame or that they need to medicate it, rather than like Spider-Man who's like, oh, every time something bad's about to happen, I get a sense. Can you get rid of that? And you're like, oh, yeah, here's a pill. And he's no longer a superhero. Our emotions are great parts of being human that allow us to understand better if we lean into the message of the emotion. And rather than saying, why do I feel this? I shouldn't feel sad. It's like, oh, it's okay to feel like anxiety. We talk about like, people you don't get anxiety like it's a disease. You experience it by often lack of self-esteem and knowing you can handle a future situation, right? That you're living in a future.
Yeah, it's that self-doubt.
Yeah, so what if you became, understanding of what it is to be confident or loving or self-respect, all the things that we help people understand so they can let anxiety go forever.
Yeah.
And if they do experience by chance, because the brain works on its own, that they can get out of that much quicker.
Yeah, because it's not a part of who they are. It's
so
just what they're experiencing. They realize it's what
Yes.
they're experiencing, not who they are.
So it is okay to be okay. It's not just okay to not be okay. It's both. And your feelings are valid for a while, but they really are just commitment to a story. So
Yeah.
for you to say that the reason I'm allowed to feel this way, and that it leads actually into the next thing. It's funny how these things trickle. The concept of what I mentioned briefly, toxic people.
Yeah.
That's another thing where people, my feelings are valid, so I'm allowed to. And yeah, people make mistakes, and there are people, but there are no such thing as toxic people.
No.
There are not. I mean. No. Everybody, how do we unpack this one? Because this is a big one. When we say there's no such thing as toxic people, I think people get upset. Like, you don't think there's toxic people?
Well, and I think it was Kerwin Ray that posted a video at one point that said, when somebody angers you, it's because they're showing you a part of you that you don't want to see. And so I think we jump so quickly to be like, that person's toxic.
Well, that's a good point.
Because if you we say you spot it, you got it.
Yeah.
And so all of the good stuff exists within you, but I mean, you have the ability to be all the garbage too. And so when you see somebody that's acting in a way that you don't like, and you're like, that's toxic. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, take a second to reflect. Have you ever been mean to somebody? Have you ever hurt somebody? Have you ever?
Yeah, but Andrew, like, they're like 80%. I'm only like 38%.
Yeah.
Like this.
Let's get the scale out and measure this. Yeah.
Yeah. Take a look. Yeah, you're right. Take a look and ask yourself, have you been that? And even if you haven't, if you say no, it's just understand the human condition of that person. We don't believe that outside of a very small percentage of people that have, like we're talking like sociopaths that like really,
like Charles Manson.
Yeah, and Jeffrey Dahmer's, all those things. Yeah. But outside of that, everybody is inherently good. And they have a story that makes them hurt, and so we know hurt people. It's very common. Yeah. Well, I've been in front of lots of speech rooms where there's a cumulative maybe thousands of people. I say, raise your hand if you've been hurt, and the whole room the whole room hurts. And so there's a sea of assholes waiting to hurt you, and the whole place laughs. Yeah. They all have stories, and when we take it personally and think, oh, that person's doing it because I'm not enough, or they don't like me, and we make it about that rather than they're in a different part of their story. And yeah, maybe they made a decision that wasn't beneficial or it was mean to you, but it isn't really about you at all times. And even if it is, I kind of think it doesn't make them toxic. It just means they're in a bad place at that time. Yeah. And we do our best to forgive. And so we're not saying, and this is an important part of it, is you need to keep that person around. It's what we say is, if you think about it, and I had
it becomes a discernment. It becomes it becomes discernment and knowing that this person may not be somebody you want to surround yourself with all the time, but it doesn't mean they're a toxic person. It just means they have their own story and they're caught in their own story. And when you can see them from that place of understanding them truly, then it takes away that weight of thinking that person's scary and I need to run and I need to hide from them.
Yes. Like, I had a friend say, like, there's a guy going through something and I'm worried that that's going to kind of impact me. What do I do? I want to turn my back and kind of just run. I was like, well, that person is metaphorically drowning in their own stuff, and we don't want to be close to someone drowning because just like in real life, someone drowning will pull you under. At the same time, we don't want to turn our back because there's going to be a moment potentially where they realize they need the help, or that they need a moment, and they're going to be like, oh, I need a life preserver, and your back's turning, you can't toss it. So I'm like, take space, but without judgment. Take space and, like you said, discernment to be like, okay, that's what they need, but it's okay to still love them. Yeah. And matter of fact, I think it would be necessary. Like, who do you think needs more love? The person who's living a good life, or the one that's feeling like life isn't going well? Well, they're mean. Well, they need more love. Yeah. They're angry. They need more love. People are either asking for love or giving it. And when you see what you think is a toxic person, there's somebody that's struggling with something. Yeah. And
they're hurting.
And kindness is really what it's about. Again, not your job to rescue them, not your job to keep them around and just forgive it all, whatever, in the sense of just letting it occur. That's not what we're saying. But to reject them with judgment, be very cautious because, there was, I've always said, I know for sure there was a time in my life where I was a toxic person to someone else, and there was people that were toxic to me. But they weren't toxic. I was just hurt, and I had a story, and I was trying my very best, and maybe I was trying too hard or whatever, and I want to be what other people I wish other were for me, which is like patience, kindness, compassion, but I respect that they needed to take time away to give space for me to kind of fizzle out and figure it out. And some of my best relationships are ones that have hurt me and trespassed me in different ways, lied to me, judged me, and then I still love them. They disappear, block me on Instagram, social media, and then come back into my life a year later and say, I was in a bad spot. I'm so sorry. Can we still be friends? And I was like, that's never changed. And that was been one of my lessons.
And I think that's a good awareness of like, if you had to block those people out of your life and been like, they're toxic and I hate them and I don't want them around me, when they come back into your life, you'd still approach them with that same energy. Right. But when you see them with that lens of love and they come back into your life, you can still have that love for them and be like, what can I do to help in this situation? What do you need me to be in this situation for you right now, when they are ready to actually heal the relationship?
Right, because forgiveness is taking the energy, the tension off of somebody for what they've done and allowing them to show up differently in their life. And you'll read it, and often you'll appreciate it. There's things that when you're like, that happened, I was like, oh, I heard him, I'm a victim. And then you're like, oh, actually, this really was a benefit in the grand scheme of things.
Do we want to talk about forgiveness? Or do we want to keep going?
That's going to be another one.
That'll be another one.
That'll be. You know what? Now we know what our next podcast is going to be. We're talking about forgiveness.
Okay.
I think that probably sums it up for tonight.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I hope some of those resonated with you.
Yeah.
Those are some of the objections / barriers that we experience as coaches, and I hope if you want to talk more about it or you want to chat about some of the things we shared and you want more clarity on it, we're willing to
absolutely
reach out and contact us. Outside of that, we hope you enjoyed our podcast. Thanks for joining in. have a great life.
Much love.
Much love. Bye.